So I'm going to welcome everybody who has arrived so far. Thank you for joining us. We can see that a lot of people are coming in as I'm speaking, so I'm going to just take a few more seconds to let more people arrive. And while we're waiting, I will post our accommodations notice. This is a facility for anybody who's hard of hearing. We have a captions service. You can cut and paste that link at the top of the slide, or is there that link is going to be posted in the featured feed, which you can find by clicking on the icon in the upper right of your screen. It's like two speech bubbles with a question mark. If you click on that, you'll see the featured feed, and in that featured feed, that link is posted. You can cut and paste that into paste it into your browser and avail of our captioning service. So I'm just going to leave this here for a moment so that as people arrive, they can see they have this option. And I'm also going to move along and ask the people in our audience who are ready to do this. If you look at the featured feed, my colleague Sam is going to publish two statements in that featured feed, and we'd like you to like the statement that most pertains to you. And you can see these graphics, if you can, in the bottom of the slide. They're showing you what that featured feed or live Q&A icon looks like. Again, it's like two speech bubbles with a question mark. If you click on that, it'll open up and you'll see two feeds. One is the featured feed and one is the My Questions feed. The live Q&A is closed right now, but if you look in the featured feed, you should see two statements. I have a business plan, or I do not have a business plan. Please like the statement that pertains to you. We want to get an understanding of where you guys stand on business planning in general. So this is a basic little question. You either have one or you don't. So please like a statement, and that will show us where you stand, and it'll give us a sense of the position of our audience members. So thank you for doing that. I'm going to move along now, and I'm going to hand the reins over to Adriana Cruz. She is our Executive Director of the Economic Development and Tourism Division of the Office of the Governor. So over to you, Adriana, to open our event.
Hi, Kelly. Thank you so much, and good afternoon to everybody. Thank you for joining us today. I'm Adriana Cruz. I'm the Executive Director of the Economic Development and Tourism Office in the Office of Governor Greg Abbott. And on behalf of Governor Abbott and the rest of the team at the Economic Development and Tourism Office, I want to thank you for joining us today for our 13th Governor Small Business webinar. As you know, our small business team has been putting these webinars together since mid-April, and each time we're changing things up and looking for topics that will be of interest to you, our small business owners. And our goal with these webinars is to provide you with information and connect you with local and regional resources that are going to help you to find success on your entrepreneurial journey. Today, our topic is going to be dynamic financial planning and ways that small businesses can enhance their business planning and cash flow management in order to increase resiliency and maintain a competitive edge. Texas, as you know, is consistently ranked as the best state to start a business, the best state to do business. And Texas also leads the nation for the number of jobs created by Black and Hispanic women-owned small businesses. A great testament to the hard work and perseverance of our entrepreneurs. Texas small businesses are the backbone of the Texas economy, and we know that Texas small businesses are continuing to face a tremendous challenge. We're here to help and to connect you with resources in your area that can assist. I want to thank you for everything that you do to keep our economy going. And I also want to thank those of you who continue to join us on our webinars. Please keep giving us your feedback, as we're always trying to improve. And now I'll turn it back over to our Office's Small Business Advocate, Kelly Spillane. Kelly.
Great, and thank you, Adriana. And so we're now going to ask you to like another set of statements, or pick one to like. If you look in the featured feed, which you can find through that live Q&A icon up at the upper right of your screen, we have two more statements published. I use the business plan as a tool to manage my business, or I do not refer to my business plan very often. So please like the one that pertains to you. Again, we want to get an understanding as to how much people actually use their business plans if they do have them. So I'll take a moment to let you guys like the one that pertains to you most. And it's going to be helpful for our panelists later on, because this will give them a sense of where you all are on these two important subjects that we're going to tackle. Okay. So while you're doing that, I'm going to introduce our panelists and explain who they are. Today, we have three panelists. We have Gina Woodward. She's the Regional Director of the Small Business Development Center in the West Texas A&M University. She is in Amarillo. And we have Randy Burch. He's the Associate Managing Director of the Small Business Development Center at Texas Tech in Lubbock. And we are also graced with the presence, and we're delighted to have him, of Scott Jensen. He is the founder and CEO of Rhythm Superfoods, but also one of the original co-founders of Stubbs, which I am sure you're all aware of is perhaps the best live music venue and barbecue joint in Austin, but also was responsible for a branded range of sauces, barbecue sauces, and condiments that are actually now a national brand. And Scott and his team actually sold that brand to McCormick Spices a number of years ago. So Scott is a very successful serial entrepreneur, and we are delighted to have him join us. And right before we kick off with talking to our panelists, I'm just going to get you guys to like one more statement, if you don't mind. My colleague Sam is publishing two more statements in the featured feed. One is, I worry about cash flow, or cash flow is not a concern. I know it's a simple question. I think that we can guess which one you're going to like more, but please like the one that pertains to you, again, to just give us a sense of where you stand on this. So while you're doing that, I am going to move along, and we're going to start with our frequently asked questions section, where I'm going to talk to each of our panelists for a couple of minutes to tackle some of the issues that we know are on everybody's minds right now. And so I'm going to kick off with these four questions, and I'm going to field the first two questions to Gina. So welcome, Gina. Thank you for joining us. And like I said, Gina is a lead advisor with the Small Business Development Center in West Texas. So Gina, I'm going to hit you with this first question, and it's quite a simple one. Why is a business plan a good idea?
You know, Kelly, when we're talking about a traditional business plan, those are a lot like a book. You're not writing a book for yourself. You're really writing the book to educate other people on a topic. So when we're talking about traditional business plans, those are a good idea when maybe you're going to approach a lender for funding. Maybe it's an angel investor or a traditional lender at a bank. You need to tell the story of your business, and you need to tell everyone about your plans. That business plan is not for you, though. That business plan is to educate other people. That's when it's a good idea.
Great. Well, thank you for that. And I know there are different ways to construct a business plan, and there are many different purposes to which it can be put. And so let's talk about that. How can I make a dynamic and useful plan as opposed to that book to educate others? How can you make it useful to the entrepreneur?
Yes, those dynamic plans are what we love doing in the office. You know, lots of the times we'll have new entrepreneurs come and set up an appointment, and they say, I need a business plan. That's what everybody thinks the very first step is. Absolutely not. What we want to look at is something more dynamic, and we can call it a dynamic business plan, or really you can think of it in terms of strategic planning is more what it is. It's where you're setting some objectives, some goals for your business. And then underneath that, we're thinking about those action steps. What are those things that we need to do to accomplish the goals? And it's never, ever just about the entrepreneur. When I'm doing these plans with my own clients here at the SBDC, I actually ask them to invite friends and family, maybe their employees, and bring them. And we use the whole big boardroom. We get out the whiteboards, we have the big gigantic white sticky notes, and the whole wall is lined, and we've all got markers, and we're all up thinking about, you know, what are those goals and how are we going to accomplish those goals? But it's so very important to include other people in that, because they're going to look at things differently. They're going to have ideas that you might never have. So it's super important to include your whole squad, everybody in the business around you, and don't just focus on this is what the business looks like. Focus on these are my goals and this is how I'm going to get there.
That's great, Gina. And I think, you know, the incorporation of key metrics that they can keep referring to is another good way to keep it alive for them, so that they keep looking at what they said they were going to do versus how they're actually doing. And with that in mind, with that in mind, I'm going to move along and talk to Randy Burch, and these second two questions are for Randy. We're going to tackle cash flow management here, which is critical, of course. And so the first question, Randy, is cash is really tight in my business. I'm considering laying off people or cutting my marketing activities. Which should I do? And we get asked those questions a lot. They're pretty critical things to make decisions on. So Randy, tell us what you think about that.
Well, thank you, Kelly. I mean, first of all, you have to realize that those all have consequences. No matter which you're trying to do, those definitely have consequences. I might first say, this is kind of a multi-part answer that I'll give for this. But first of all, I might say if you're short on cash flow, welcome to the club. Most all small businesses are short on cash flow at the current time. So as you go through this, instead of laying off employees or start making drastic cuts to your marketing, the first thing you want to do is you want to look, is there ways that you can save your cash flow? And these are some things that sometimes people forget about. I'll just run through a few that we typically go over with our clients. You want to look, can you renegotiate a lease? Can you redo one of your loans? Some of your contracts, those type of things. Is there any renegotiation that you can do in those? The other thing we see in any business, except maybe a service business, is inventory. So often small businesses have old inventory on the shelf, maybe that's collecting dust, or maybe it's in the back warehouse, and you're going, well, that's not selling, but maybe it's going to sell one day. I paid $29.95 for this, and I just don't want to take a loss on it. But what you have to remember is that's cash sitting on your shelf or sitting in your back warehouse. If you have to take a loss on that, get rid of that old inventory. That's going to free up cash that you need for right now. Another thing is to chase accounts receivables. Quit giving free interest loans on those to the people that are buying from you. If at all possible, get them to pay as soon as the purchase is made or the service is rendered. And then be real slow on paying your accounts payable. Sometimes you may have to make a decision on what am I not going to pay this month? And look at that and say, well, if I don't pay this, what's that going to do to my business? Some things you always want to make sure you stay up to date on: sales tax, comptroller office, your 941s, your IRS, those type of things. Make sure you stay up to date on that, because you don't want to get behind with the state or with the federal government. But maybe if you do get behind with the vendor, what's that really going to do to you? Sometimes you have to make those hard choices. And then always evaluate your price structures. What I mean by that, I've done this for 17 years, owned a small business before I came to the SBDC. And what I see day in and day out when we're talking with clients is running their business, that they have not realized that their cost of goods has begun to rise. And so they haven't changed their pricing structure, but their cost of goods have gone up. So that their margins has become less, and that immediately affects their bottom line. There's a tool on our website that I think the website will be up later. It's called the Common Sizing Tool. And it's just a way to take a couple of periods of time and look at that and divide that all into your sales. And then when you're looking at it in percentages instead of numbers, you can immediately begin to see where the problem is. And then another thing on trying to reserve your cash, look at service contracts, and maybe you have a coffee service that you can cut, or a floor mat cleaning service. I mean, just saving those few $100s here and there will begin to add up. But if you've done all of that and you say, okay, I still need to look at cash. So then you're looking at your marketing, or you're looking at cutting payroll. So when you look at marketing, see if there's some things that you can do. Maybe you can piggyback with another company on advertising. That's a good way to cut the cost there in half. Teach a class, be a subject matter expert on something. When you're considered the expert, they're going to come back to you. I'm never a big fan of signing long-term contracts. I always say, if you're not tracking your marketing, don't be doing it. You've got to track your marketing and see what's working. And don't sign those long-term marketing contracts until you know that it's going to work. Now, if we go to the last part of that question about laying off employees, and I'm trying to go through this relatively quickly and just give you the highlights, because we want to have plenty of time for question and answers at the end. But Laying off employees does have consequences, but sometimes that's what you have to do. And as a business owner, you need to be willing to make that decision if necessary. But if you've done everything else and you're saying, okay, I've got to the point that I need to lay off some employees, look at what that's going to do to your bottom line. So if you cut 2 employees, what is that actually going to do to your bottom line? Another thing I like to do is I like to look at the sales per employee for this year versus last year. You know, see how you're doing. Can you do with 1 less employee or 2 less employees? But understand that when you do that, there are some consequences. For instance, right now, if you have a PPP loan and you haven't gone through the forgiveness on that, there could be some consequences for laying off an employee that you might have to pay back a little bit of that PPP loan. So all of these things you have to take into consideration. So it's not just a one answer fits all. You know, we like to go through the whole process with everybody. I'll say one other thing, that if you've done all of this and man, cash flow is still hurting. We were on a conference the other day with Damon Johns of the Shark Tank. I think most of you probably be familiar with this. And he made a statement that made an impact on me. He said, you know, right now we're in a bad economy that's starting to improve. But he said, if you're failing, get as small as you can to survive. Even if that means you need to move your business back into your garage. Get as small as you can to survive through this, and know and be ready for the comeback that'll be around the corner. This is not going to last forever. The economy's improving, and so be ready for that comeback.
Wow, that's great advice, actually. I've just written that down. I'm going to be repeating that. And I'm just going to take a moment to look at the likes we have in the featured feed on the different statements. And it looks like slightly more people don't actually have a business plan. That's interesting to know. It's also interesting to see that of the people who do have a business plan, they don't actually refer to it very often, so it isn't as dynamic as it could be. And so I'm hoping that we'll talk about some things and bring up some techniques or tools that people can consider to use in making their business plan just that bit more dynamic, so it becomes a useful tool for them. And of course, the last statement, to no surprise, 10 times of the people are worried versus just 10% are not worried. Well, lucky you, 10%. I think a lot of people would be envious. So I'm just going to go on to my last question with Randy. So the last question, Randy, is, with so much uncertainty, just like you were talking about, how can I keep an eye on the health of my business?
So, the health of your business is something you need to be looking at all the time. We use a little 30-minute business checkup tool that we have, and it is on our website. It's at lubbocksbdc.org/tools. And so you can go there yourself and pull that down. And it's a series of questions, and then you give yourself a score. And then it's good to have that benchmark to be able to then compare that with other things. And so this little 30-minute checkup is pretty simple, but what it does is it begins to make you focus as a business owner and think through some things and going, I really haven't put a lot of time into that, and maybe I need to think about that. And then if you do that maybe every quarter, or at least once a year, you have a score that you can then base on and see how your business is doing. So we use that a whole lot to just kind of determine where we are and just give us quick oversight of our business.
That's great. And actually, we have a link to that tool and maybe some other tools that you've provided us with, and it'll be shared in the deck. And anyone in the audience there will have access to our slide deck after the event, and all of the links are live, and you can click on those then, so that you don't have to be writing anything down at the moment, because you will have access later. Okay, so thank you to Gina and Randy, and I'm going to move along now, and I am going to ask some questions of our serial and successful entrepreneur. And right before I do that, I'm just going to announce that our live Q&A feed is now open. You can start typing questions that you want to ask to the panel. We're going to publish the questions that are broadly relevant, and you'll see those in the featured feed. And as they get published by my colleagues, please like the ones that you want to hear the answer to most. We're going to prioritize those. I will also say that we don't always get to answer all the questions. We have colleagues in the backstage, if you like, who are going to answer questions directly if they can do it. So look out for your question to be answered directly, as opposed to live with the panelists. So please start typing your questions now, and I'm going to move along to introduce Scott Jensen. Thank you so much, Scott. Thank you for joining us. And I am going to kick off by asking you, about times in your career where your business plan played an important role, perhaps in solving a problem or achieving some success or some growth. So we'd love to hear some stories about how the business plan has been a useful tool for you.
Oh yeah, thanks, Kelly. And just, I was just dying to add into Gina and Randy's comments. Everything they said was 100% spot on. When we talk about the dynamic planning model, because I've got investors, both professional and angel investors, I kind of have the obligation to report back to them and report to a board. So I have this dynamic planning where we run an evergreening or continually changing 3-year plan. Obviously, we focus more closely to the year ahead of us. And on a monthly and then quarterly basis, we're marking ourselves against the plan and adjusting. So it's not something that's concrete. I loved some of the ideas about saving the cash, and I wanted to add one thing to what Randy was saying, and you have to be honest with yourself in that if what you have is a downturn in a time where it's not going to come back, then the headcount reduction and getting as small as you can is like your last resort. But the cost of getting someone back that's really good is more than the cost of a headhunter or the time. People that have been there for 5 or 10 years, they've got all of this incredible DNA knowledge of your business that hiring someone new 2 years later or 6 months later, they're not going to have that in their closet, in their tool chest. So I was thinking about your question, Kelly. One of the things that just hit us 2-3 weeks ago. We do our planning process. We're looking at 2021 right now for forecasting. We start from the ground up, like how many bags of this particular product will I sell to this retailer per month? And from there, the sales team builds a sales forecast that then turns into what would be a marketing forecast and a production forecast, and then finally financial forecast. In reassessing some of those, objectives that we have for next year, the sales team was marking what our current velocity or how many bags we sell per month to certain retailers. And if we hadn't gone back there and reassessed that, what it showed us is that we're about 50 or 60% lower in our forecasts than what we're actually selling in those stores. So we are marking it to actuals right now. And then we look ahead to next year in 2021, and I don't have enough equipment to make enough product based off of how much product and the velocity of how fast I'm selling it. So that then drives, a reforecasting for these several retailers. That rolls up into an operations forecast. It's like, do we have enough machines? Can we tweak the machines? Can we put another 8-hour shift on the machines? Do I need to buy more machines? So to us, it's so dynamic. If you're a sole proprietor or an owner of a smaller business that doesn't have to report to board members, first of all, lucky you, but going through the exercise of that dynamic planning is going to help you mark yourself against reality. So sometimes if you're like me, I put the blinders on, I just grind, I'm working all the time. The fact that I have to report to other people makes me come up for air, pause, breathe, and then with my team, as Gina was saying, get in a room with the yellow stickies and the whiteboards and mark down where you think you want to be a year or 18 months from now, because that will drive the decisions that you're making today.
Excellent. Well, thank you so much for that. And so, again, as we all know, cash flow is critical to everybody, but particularly in the food industry and in the business model that you guys run, cash flow is absolutely critical to survival. So I'd love to hear some stories or examples of or key things that you have done to keep that cash flowing successfully to your business.
Yeah, I think for those that may be on the line that are in the consumer product space, unless you're a unicorn, and unicorns come along every few years where you're making something so dynamic, there's no competitors out there, the margin is 80%, your growth is 50%. Sometimes you can cash flow your own growth. But again, that's a unicorn, and they're pretty and they're colorful and they've got horns in the middle of their forehead, but they're few and far between. So for the rest of us mortals trying to run a regular business, the cash itself, and when things get tight, what are you able to do? I think, Randy gave several really good concepts to analyze yourself. For us, in addition to just your normal lines of credit, when you first start out or you're a smaller business, many people are using factoring your receivables. As you get a little bit bigger and more stable, you can deal with banks on a lending basis on a line of credit where your receivables, if they're from good, solid companies, that's an asset that can be borrowed against on a line of credit. So those are your typical ways of creating some cash flow or liquidity and working capital. Another way in times like this, and we've just used this over the last 9 months, the vendors that I do business with, and they're important to me, I'm important to them. They have a tremendous stake in us because we're doing a large amount of business with them. So I don't want to say like we're too big to fail, because we're not. They've got plenty of other customers. But if I'm honest and transparent with them, I can go to them and say, hey, we're in a tight spot here, but it's only going to be for 4 or 5 months, or I'm going to start raising some capital and 6 months later I'll be able to tie this down. But I think I need to stretch you from 30-day terms to say 60 or 90-day terms. And I'll keep you informed along the way, but this is going to last a certain amount of time. That creates cash like you've never seen. Now you have to have a good relationships with these people, and you have to be honest with them, but credit from your vendors is the best credit, because you don't have to go through an application process. You either have had a relationship with these people long enough to where they trust you, and if they don't, then you got to go down to the next person on the list. So that to me is a big source of capital. And as Randy was saying also, it's like stretch your payables, but if you have to go more than a week or two where they're normally knocking on the door, you might have to do a top to top call and say, I really need to stretch you, and I need to stretch you further. To go even further with this concept, we just within the last 6 months, we were in a capital raise situation, and I had a really, really sharp group of people that's handling most of our freight, and they're entrepreneurs, and we were stretching them and talking to them about the stretch. And I asked them if they wanted to invest some of the payables to them or receivables to them in our capital raise, in the equity in the company. And that creates a whole different dynamic. Instead of just owing them the money, now they're a part owner, and in a small way, but still an owner alongside any other investors that are in. And now they'll treat you different, you'll treat them different. But the best part about it is being a shareholder of your company, you're now going to do business with them for maybe a longer period of time than if they hadn't been willing to work with you in a tight patch. So that's another good way of like turning someone that's just a vendor into suddenly a partner.
Wow, I really love that idea. That's a very creative idea. I guess you have to have that really good relationship in the first place to begin that conversation. That's a great point to make. Those good relationships can be leveraged at a time like this. And I think sometimes people don't have the confidence to put up their hand and say, hey, I'm in a tight spot, I need help here. And reaching out and having conversations with those stakeholders is such a good idea. And it's great to hear it from somebody like yourself, that that's something that you've used. It sort of gives license to people to consider it as a strategy. So thank you so much for that, Scott. And this ends our frequently asked questions piece. We're going to move along now, and we're going to start our live Q&A, which I'm sure everybody's looking forward to. And I'm going to hand over the reins now to Jarvis Brewer. Over to you, Jarvis.
Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining. We have quite a few questions that have been submitted, but continue to submit your questions. We're having some slight difficulties with the camera as well as the questions feed. At the moment, they're currently not loading up. So give me just 1 second.
Maybe while you're figuring that out, I'll ask a first question, and we'll see how we get on with that. Okay. Let me just see. Okay, the first question that appears in my screen anyway is what is the best approach to gain capital funding for business growth? And I'm going to ask Randy about that. Randy, would you like to answer that question? And maybe we'll invite any of the other panelists to join in after Randy has a few words to say.
Can you?
Okay.
Sorry. Let's see. Is it coming back? Okay. Camera on. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you, Randy. Yes, we just can't see you. Unfortunately, the camera seems to be stuck. But let's just see how we can get on with that.
I'm sorry, Kelly. Can you ask the question one more time? I apologize.
Sure. What is the best approach to gain capital for funding business growth?
So there's a number of ways, and it kind of depends on where you are. I assume that we're talking about capital as they're already in business and they're looking to expand for growing their business. And so there are, I mean, you have the standard bank loans. You also have what Scott was talking about, where you're raising capital, you're inviting people to become ownership of your business. And so it depends on what you want. Do you want the complete control? And if so, then you're going to be looking really just at your traditional financing. But if you're willing to let others be a part of your business, that opens it up a little bit more to, so then you have some angel investors, you have different types of people that family and friends that you can bring into the business and make them part owner of the business. So it's a hard question to know without knowing a little more detail about what they're wanting to do, but I think that kind of gives both sides of the story that they might be looking for.
That's great. And actually, I might ask Scott the same question. In your experience looking for growth capital, you gave a great example of leveraging relationships in terms of handling cash flow issues, but growth capital, I think that might be something you'll have a fair few things to say about.
Yeah, I think, I always went towards the approach of finding investors for not only Stubbs Barbecue Restaurant, but also the Stubbs Barbecue Sauce Company, but also now with Rhythm Superfoods. And kind of out of the gate, we knew we were going to be finding investors. We didn't have the capital to grow like we were going to grow. So that was a part of understanding how to go out and raise equity capital or selling pieces of your business versus borrowing money from either a bank or a friend. And in this state, we have a tremendous amount of resources from the angel networks that are in Houston and Baylor and Concho Valley and Austin and several in the Dallas-Fort Worth area and elsewhere, like I'm sure all across the state. So these are groups that come together. They're high net worth individuals that are accredited investors that come together. Sometimes you're standing in front of 20 people, sometimes it's 200 people, and you're giving your 10-minute pitch of what your company is and what you're going to do to grow it, and hopefully what you're going to do to create value so that you can pay those people back with a lot more money than they gave you. So an equity part of it, of raising capital, is one way. It's a full-time job. If you're going to say to yourself, I need to go raise $1 million or $500,000 or $5 million, whoever the leader is that's going to do that really has to get really organized with all the conversations. You may have to speak to 10 or 20 people to get one person to write a check. So it's a matter of numbers and filtering who's really interested in you and your business. And if they are, do they have other people that they want to introduce to you? So it's a huge networking effort that if you're into selling some of your business off to someone else, you then have to treat them as a minority shareholder and treat the capital that they brought in a very different way than kind of the way you did it before. Oftentimes you'll set up a board of directors or a board of advisors so that you're accountable to the people that invested into your company. The only other thing I would also say again is the process of creating capital for your growth is finding lending and what assets do you have. Again, receivables are assets. Inventory in your warehouse can be lent against, usually not with factors, but if you are able to establish a line of credit with a lending bank against your assets, it's receivables and inventory are the two key things that you can create a line of credit, and that creates liquidity and working capital.
Excellent, and thank you for that. And I see, while I have you, Scott, I see there's a lot of questions in the unpublished feed about startup capital besides the SBA, let's say, and I think that's what the question is about. And I think that what you just referred to, that angel investment, is one of the things to consider, a very important thing to consider. And friends and family are also a great place to look. And again, I'll just ask you, Scott, to give a quick comment on startup capital for somebody at that super early stage.
Yeah, so the friends and the family are the first place to go, because they usually are not going to drive you through the due diligence grinder like a professional investor, even if they're an angel investor. When you get, even though you're going to take money from a friend or a family, there's still this legal obligation, and then you have to be dealing with lawyers to get the documents in place that you need in order to be able to take money from an individual investor. But if you are comfortable reaching out to the broader community in these angel networks, it is a whole new learning experience. It's like a brand new language of terms that you have to be prepared to write a subscription agreement and make sure that the people you're taking money from are accredited investors. But we have an incredible resource in this state. First of all, a tremendous amount of wealth in this state. A lot of entrepreneurs, people that have made it, that want to give back to younger entrepreneurs or other entrepreneurs that are growing their business. So the place is there, and almost every city in this state has one or two angel investor groups. If they're not formal, they can be informal. There's an online portal nationally called GUST, G-U-S-T, that most of those angel networks align into, and you can find out from that website where all the angel investors are and how to apply through their administrators. You know, here in Austin, the big one is Central Texas Angel Network, or CTAN, but there's Houston Angel Network, Baylor Angel Network, Lone Star in Dallas, and on and on and on.
Great, and thank you for that. And so actually, I can see another published question. Yes.
Can I add to that just a little bit?
Yes, of course.
A couple of other things that for startup capital, besides just a standard loan with SBA or a bank. You also have a lot of micro lenders across the state. We have several in the state of Texas that will take a, they're not an asset lender like a bank would be or something like that. They'll take more of a risk on a startup. And then also something that I tell our people that are in smaller communities, the EDC, your local economic development center, sometimes will help fund a startup business or part of that if you're going to be creating several jobs in a small community. So I always want to look at those assets too and that type of thing.
Excellent. Thank you for that. And I'll move along to Gina, actually. And there was a question there. It's just gone off my screen, but it was basically looking for help with creating what I would suggest is a good, dynamic, useful business plan. And I'm going to ask you that question. Where can they go? And it's obviously a nice segue into talking about the small business development centers and what you do.
Of course, they're always welcome to contact their local SBDC. There is one that's assigned to every single part of the state and the United States as well. I definitely recommend using, whether it's an SBDC consultant, some other third-party consultant, as sort of a moderator when you're going through that exercise. It's good to have somebody who's not directly involved in the business and maybe has a different perspective. But if for whatever reason you don't have access to that SBDC, you can certainly do it yourself. Again, you want to invite the friends, the family, and the employees. And I can quickly run you through the framework that I use when I do strategic planning with clients. And I actually do it annually for our office, and Randy and I are about to do it for our region. It is just absolutely one of the simplest business tools that there is, but I have found it over my last 12 years here to really be one of the most valuable tools that we have, and it's a SWOT analysis. For anybody that is not familiar with a SWOT analysis, it is 4 letters. It's literally 4 letters. It's your strengths, weaknesses, opportunities, and threats. Your strengths and weaknesses are things that are internal to you and your company that you have some amount of control over and can modify. And your opportunities and threats are things that are external to the organization that you can't necessarily control, but you can plan for. You can take advantage of those opportunities, or you can somehow compensate and anticipate those threats. When I'm doing that strategic planning for a client, I have those 4 big sticky notes up on the wall, SWOT. Everybody has a marker, and we're just going around writing our answers on that. There's no wrong ideas, no wrong answers. Everything that comes to mind with regard to your current objectives and goals is going to go up on that wall. And it's always interesting. Every time I do one of those with somebody, never fails that there'll be a theme that emerges. For example, we just went through strategic planning for my office, I mentioned, and I invited some partners to participate because it can't just be me or we're going to have the same ideas over and over. I needed to have those other third parties in the room. And through the course of the morning, it became very apparent that what we needed to do was focus on providing courses for entrepreneurs. I never would have come up with that idea on my own, but those partners helped us realize that we needed courses. But it took all of us together to do that. So again, if you don't have access to an SBDC for one reason or another, invite your friends, family, vendors, probably not your competition, but invite some friends and family in and do that worksheet together.
Great. And Gina, while I have you, I saw in the unpublished questions quite a lot of people asking about the best time to apply for PPP forgiveness. Now, I know today is not about PPP and so on, but I think I'll ask that question since I have you, what your view would be on companies applying for that forgiveness.
Absolutely. If your PPP loan was for under $150,000, I would not apply for forgiveness right now. And in fact, the lender likely won't even accept the application. We've had most of the national banking associations and some of the state associations as well have been lobbying Congress to pass an act that will provide automatic forgiveness for any PPP loans 150 and under. I personally think that that's probably going to pass. It looks very promising, but right now, of course, things are crawling along. So I think in November, we'll likely see some movement on that. If your loan was for 150 or up, you have the 24 weeks to use it. If you've already used it, you can absolutely contact your lender and go ahead and start that process.
Great, and thank you, Gina. And I would just like to apologize to our audience as well as our fellow panelists here. Teams is really letting us down. We are unable to have the speakers be live. It seems to be me live, and I'm sort of stuck here. And then other people that we managed to put live stay for too long as well. So sorry about the confusion, but Teams is absolutely letting us down. But I'm going to move along and I'm going to ask Scott a question. In fact, I see Scott might want to say something. So Scott, go ahead and say what's on your mind, and I might ask you that question when you're done.
If I'm live, if I'm assuming I am.
Well, you can be heard but not seen right now because
okay. And I just wanted to add to what Gina was saying. Like, SWOT analyses have been the lifeblood of dynamic planning for 50 years, 40 years, however long it is. And I don't think it's ever going to leave. One of the interesting dynamics of it is it's easy to do and everyone can understand it. But also, if you get a group of people together, it can be the basis of your plan, right? Because it's what energizes you to opportunities or mitigate certain things you're doing because of risk. So you may think that you know what your strengths and weaknesses are, but if you're bringing in the rest of your management team or other people, outsiders, you'll be absolutely surprised at the answers you're going to get, and it's going to educate you. And by saying what you think your answers are, sharing it with the rest of your team, they're not seeing everything that you're seeing. So it really is a big basis to starting that process of a dynamic plan, because from that first simple little exercise, which is a lot of fun to do, that can birth your financial, your sales plan, your CapEx plan. So I would just wholeheartedly say that the SWOT analysis, sometimes it gets beat up by some people, but it's the birthplace of great ideas and activity for any business.
And revisiting it in a dynamic way, revisiting that business plan routinely and using some discipline makes those great ideas stay alive and even grow. You know, I think that's the one thing we'd like to get across here, is that dynamic means you keep having to refer to it, keep using it. The more you use it, the better it is for you, you know. And so since I have you and you are live and people can see you, I'd like to ask you if you would care to share a scary story with us, perhaps a cash flow crisis story that got solved in a way maybe you didn't anticipate, or something truly innovative that sort of fell out of the sky for you. Would you have a story like that for us?
Well, yeah, I remember in the Stubbs barbecue days, when the dynamics of investment capital weren't the same 20 years ago that they are now. The infrastructure of angel investors and how to we couldn't find any money. There was no angel networks. There was no get-togethers where people would listen to your business plan. Shark Tank, it was 20 years away from being invented, or 15 years away from being invented. So we had hit the skids. And what ends up happening in the food business, the freight companies are the ones that are the first to kind of shut you down. They want to get paid in 15 days. They've got the tightest credit terms. Once you've hit the end of the road with one, you're calling others. Once you've kind of hit the end of the road with 2 or 3 of them, they start giving your credit issues to the credit observing firms, and then other freight companies won't touch you. So that part was scary. If you can't ship product, you can't get revenue. We knew we had to make some changes in the business. We had far too many items that we were trying to sell. And to Randy's point before, with 72 different items we were selling, we had a core of 17. That was 85% of our revenue. But we had labels and bottles and boxes and finished goods, millions of dollars of that sitting in the warehouse waiting to sell, but they just weren't turning. And yet we thought we were great because we had so many different items that we were selling, from canned lima beans to organic olive oil. All of this stuff took 3, 4, 5, 6 months to sell. So we had that abrupt moment of the freight companies are no longer doing business with us. We stopped, we reanalyzed, we went through a whole planning session, decided to knock down from 72 SKUs, stock keeping units, down to the 17 core and get back to our core. Within 3 months, cash flow and the liquidity started coming back into the balance sheet. It happened even quicker than that, but like really cash flow positive was 90 days away, and we were losing money at the time because we had so much energy and time spent on all these other things that weren't really selling. The same amount of human resource, not just capital resources tied up in the inventory, but people paying attention to it instead of paying attention to the things that are really driving the business. So that moment of 90 days, the realization that we couldn't sell 72 items to the supermarkets of America and got back to our core allowed us to then, after that, we never were cash flow negative. We were making money from there on out, but we grew too fast. We were ahead of our ski tips, and it took like the freight guys to say, hey, you guys are way over your skis. Settle down and start paying me what you owe me. That makes you go back to the basics.
Wow, that's a really good story, and it's a really live example of why, especially young consumer goods companies, should really focus on not having too many products in their range, because each product costs you not just in time, but in cash and investment and storing it, shipping it, everything. Like Scott just said, I think that's a really important thing for people to keep in mind. Keep the product line tight and sharp and focus on the ones that sell. It's great advice. And so I think I'm going to ask Randy if we can get you on. Let's just see if that is working. Not so. So Randy, if you might want to share with us a couple of more tips on managing cash. That was a great story from Scott, and in fact the food and the consumer goods industry I think is one of the most challenging when it comes to cash flow. But do you have any examples, or even a story of a client that you've worked with that you were able to help take them from cash flow challenges to being cash flow positive?
Sure. So I think I'll go back to kind of what I said, because I just see this so often, and I'll go a little more detail into it. But we have so many businesses that come into us that, like I said, they're so busy doing the day-to-day operations that they forget to look at those margins, and they forget to look at raising those prices. I always give the example that, you know, a small business owner will say, oh, well, I just feel like I can't raise the price anymore because my customers won't buy. And I said, when you walked into Walmart last time, did they tell you that they had raised the price, and did that make you stop buying? And they're, well, no. Well, that's the same way. I mean, you deserve the right to make that profit too. And so in order to survive, you have to keep those margins up. So that going back and looking at that cost of goods and really putting that in that percentage using the common sizing tool to be able to go through that and see that really begins to help a business. And so we've seen businesses that I've worked with businesses before that have gone and say, oh, wow, I didn't realize, I thought I had a 50% margin and it has scaled down to 20 or 25. So they make that immediate change. They, you know, and maybe they do lose a few customers, but overall they were surprised. They lost very few customers, even though they went up on the price or went up on the contracts they had, because people liked what they were doing. And overall, in just a month or two, they turned that business around. And so I just focus on that just because we see it so often.
Great. And you know, while I have you, I have a quick question. I see that published feed has come alive again, and I see somebody is looking for clarity on the difference between SCORE and the SBDCs in relation to mentoring. So if you could give us a quick difference there.
Sure. So we are both resource partners of the Small Business Administration, a federal government agency. So SCORE is made up of retired executives for the most part. They're volunteering their time to help businesses go through the process of starting or growing. There is a SCORE chapter that services most areas of Texas. Sometimes you may have to drive a little further to get to a SCORE chapter. They're not as prominent as the SBDCs. The SBDCs are still a resource partner, but we also have the state of Texas behind us and doing funding. And so we're full-time consultants that are here 8 to 5 and staffed with the full staff based out of universities. And so we have those resources behind us also. But we both do the same thing as far as planning, helping, advising. Sometimes SCORE is just a little harder to meet with because the volunteer and those type of things, but they do have a lot of knowledge that they can share. Gina, was there anything you think you need to add to that I missed?
No, I think you explained that well, but I would like to back up and tack something onto your conversation about cash flow, if I can, Kelly.
Sure, go ahead.
Something in particular that we have started working on with clients really since this summer, since COVID hit. Of course, a lot of small businesses are really struggling with cash flow, and their typical markets may have dried up. So what we are encouraging people to do is take a step back and take a look at your current assets, your tangible and intangible assets. Take a look at your current services and your current skills of yourself and your staff, and reimagine those. What could you do differently with those assets, with those skills? And then take it a step further. What new markets could you potentially reach with those new uses for your assets, services, and skills? And I think that it's something that could serve people well at any time, but in particular this year where we have entire industries that have just dried up or have been closed. You've got to reimagine things.
Yeah, that's a really good point, and actually leads me to bring up a question that I see Dave Marsh in our featured or published feed is asking. It's not exactly what we're tackling today, but it's still an interesting question, and I might put this to Scott. Dave is asking, what industries do you see as stronger during the pandemic, and which do you see as weaker or at risk? I'm just wondering, this is just a personal view we're asking for here. Scott, what do you think? Oh, you're muted there, Scott.
For anyone that's in the consumer product space, I'll just say there's a very clear dividing line between those retailers that had a quote unquote curbside pickup, delivery, direct-to-consumer component already inlaid in them. In the grocery place, to keep it tight and short, there are those retailers that before the pandemic were prepared for curbside pickups and delivery. Whole Foods is one of our customers. They were purchased by Amazon a few years ago because of Amazon's technology and how they go to market, and we're already developing their own Amazon delivery systems for groceries. That put them at an advantage to some other retailers that hadn't even started on a shopping app. Some people don't have the physical assets to put a pickup area next to their grocery store. So that I see this dividing line in the retailers, and it's not just in grocery, it's in all other retailers. Of course, no one's out shopping, so anyone in retail at malls and other type of retail places are struggling because no one's out shopping. But just in general, those folks that were already prepared are thriving, where the other folks are really struggling. And you'll see that like in the demand right now for direct to consumer people that will manage that business, and the technology people that understand the software, and the people that understand the marketing elements of Facebook and search engine optimization. Those people are suddenly in huge demand because so much of the grocery business has shifted over, whether it's temporary or permanent, we won't know for another 6 or 12 months. But the demand for that type of talent to add to your business to quickly catch up is really evident to see.
Yeah, no, that's an excellent point. Actually, it brings up something that we've been aware of for a while, is that the online platforms like Facebook, Amazon, Google, eBay, Twitter, all of the big platforms have fantastic online training that help people become experts in those platforms, how to optimize them for social media marketing and how to optimize them for e-commerce, if that's a possibility for their business. And we have links to all of those trainings, if you like. They're available actually on our website, and links to our website will be shared with our last slides. But I would urge small businesses to consider either becoming experts yourselves or hiring somebody in and having them become your in-house expert, because you can do that for free, which is critical. And so we're coming towards the end, and I think I would like to just just ask Scott for some final words of wisdom for businesses at the moment in this uncertain time, where we still aren't certain where the light is at the end of the tunnel. We know it's coming, but we're not sure for how long. Any words of advice or tips for kind of treading water just long enough to get to that light again?
You know, I've been in the darkest moments with different companies that I've worked at or started. I've been at the darkest moment, and I may be the eternal optimist because we have an accelerator program here in Austin called SKU, and they're usually startup people, and they're usually struggling for cash in the beginning and raising capital, and people are typically month to month, hand to mouth in their businesses at this point until they can find the right momentum that attracts investors. And I'm always someone that just gives optimism, because almost every situation you're in, you can find the path out. You have to get up in the morning and put the boots on and find a way to get that optimistic energy. And if you have the negative energy coming at you, you've got to figure out how to shut that off. I'm not talking about being stupid to the metrics that are real. If you were in the buggy whip business back when the car came out, there was someone knocking on your door telling you that the business is going to go away. But if you're honest with yourself about your business and it's this temporary situation, particularly caused by the COVID pandemic, like there is a light at the end of the tunnel, and it's not a train coming at you. It's like the promised land. And so you've got to figure out how to get yourself in that space to be optimistic, to lead your team, because your team may be having struggles at home and trying to figure out how to get the kids on Zoom, and the schedule's changing every day. So if you're a leader in your business, now is the time to figure out how to be that leader and to push the bad stuff away, concentrate, and help lead your team. Bit of optimism for everyone.
Excellent, and that is a great way to end this conversation. Thank you so much, Scott. Optimism is essential, isn't it, for keeping that show on the road and keeping that momentum moving forward. So thank you for that. I'd like to thank Gina Woodward, and I would like to thank Randy Burch for your contributions. Thank you to all of our panelists. It's been great to have you here. Apologies again to our audience with our difficulties with the camera, making people live, and with the live Q&A feed just failing ultimately. Thank you for your patience and thank you for staying with us. I'm going to pretty much move along and show these last two slides, which is just reassuring everybody who's here that you can reach out to us. You can access this deck after the event. You'll get an email with links for that. And these are ways to reach out to the small business team at the Office of the Governor and look at some of the resources on our website. And then this last slide is access information for the Northwest Texas SBDC. There's a link there to the tools that Randy spoke about. And then there's other information there in relation to the UT San Antonio SBDC COVID Business Recovery Center. If people can't get through to their own local SBDCs, which happens, you can reach out to this center. There's a phone number there, and there's also an email address. They can serve clients and customers all across Texas. So feel free to reach out to them. And just beneath that is just resources for the SBA. And we are about to conclude. I want to thank you for joining us. Thank you for your patience with Teams letting us down. And do please reach out if you feel your questions weren't answered today. Thank you very much. And so we're going to close the event and make it not live. And we look forward to seeing you all again in a future webinar. Thank you.